They dragged her through the front gate, like she was nothing. Like the dirt under her fingernails made her less than human. The man in the black suit didn't even look up.
He just laughed.
Said her little garden was a joke. Said she was a joke. But that night, when 3 bullets found him in the dark, his doctors ran out of answers. His blood wouldn't stop. His body was shutting down. Every specialist in Seoul was on the phone, and nobody could explain what was happening to him. Except her. Because she'd seen this before. She knew exactly what poison was eating him alive. And she knew the only thing on earth that could pull him back from the edge of death was growing quietly in the garden he'd laughed at. The question wasn't whether she could save him. The question was, why would she? Her name was Amara Osei. And if you passed her on the street, hands stained green from work, old boots, a canvas bag full of roots and clippings, you would not give her a second glance. That was exactly how she preferred it. Amara was 28 years old, the daughter of a Ghanaian herbalist father and a South Korean mother who had met in a university greenhouse in Accra 30 years ago and never quite recovered from falling in love. She had inherited her father's knowledge of plants, deep, old knowledge, the kind that doesn't live in textbooks, and her mother's quiet stubbornness, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already won. She had come to Seoul 3 years ago. Not for love. Not for adventure. She had come because her mother was sick, and her mother's small apartment in Mapogu needed someone to cook for her, sit with her, and keep the small rooftop garden alive. The garden her mother had built over 20 years with seeds sent from Ghana, from her own mother and her mother's mother before that. Amara had built her small life around that garden and the small botanicals business she ran, selling tinctures, dried herbs, and medicinal preparations to a quiet list of clients who had learned, through word of mouth, that she knew things about plants that no pharmacy could offer. She was not rich. She was not connected. She was not, by any definition that Seoul's elite would recognize, important. Which is why, on the morning that changed everything, no one thought twice about the way she was treated. It started with a wall. Specifically, the wall that separated the cramped row of older residential buildings on Chongpo from the property that had recently, very recently, and very quietly, been purchased by a company called Seo Holdings. Amara had noticed the construction crew arrive 6 weeks ago. She had watched, with growing unease, as the old iron fence that marked the boundary between her mother's building's communal garden space and the neighboring property was quietly extended, inch by inch, week by week. She had said nothing at first. She was not the type to make noise. But on that Tuesday morning, she walked outside with her watering can to find 3 men in hard hats pulling up the wooden border markers that separated what was legally communal garden ground from private property, and they were pulling up her markers. Her beds. The raised wooden frames she had built herself, the ones containing her mother's rarest plants, including the small cluster of Cryptostegia grandiflora, Ghanaian rubber vine, known locally as Adwaran Cran, that her grandmother had sent as seeds in a small paper envelope 15 years ago.
"Stop," she said.
Her voice was quiet. It was always quiet. The men didn't stop. She stepped in front of the nearest one. "Those plants are mine. This ground has been communal property for 40 years. You don't have the right to." "Lady." The man didn't even look at her properly. "Talk to the office. We're just doing our job." The office, it turned out, was a temporary construction trailer at the edge of the property. And inside the trailer sat a man named Park Do-hyun, who was the site manager, and who looked at Amara's carefully organized folder of communal property documentation with the expression of a man watching a child explain something very simple and very wrong. "The survey was redone last month," he said. "The boundary has been adjusted. That ground is now within Seo Holdings' registered property line." "That's not possible," Amara said. "I have the original. The original is 30 years old." He slid the papers back across the desk toward her. "I suggest you speak with a lawyer." She had no money for a lawyer. She stood outside the trailer for a long moment, the morning sun warm on her face, her folder pressed against her chest, watching the men continue to dismantle the frames she had built with her own hands. And then she heard the cars arrive. 3 black vehicles. The kind that don't announce themselves but somehow announce everything anyway. The men who got out of the cars wore suits that cost more than Amara made in 3 months. They moved with the smooth, practiced efficiency of people who have never, in their adult lives, been told no. At the center of the group was a man she would later learn was Seo Jihan. He was tall for a Korean man, broad across the shoulders in a way that the expensive suit tried to minimize and failed. He had the kind of face that would have been beautiful if it hadn't been set into an expression of such permanent, controlled coldness. He looked like a man who had decided, at some early point in his life, that warmth was a liability he could not afford. He was 34 years old. He ran Seo Holdings, which was what the world saw. What the world did not see, or chose not to see, was that Seo Holdings was the legitimate face of something much older, much darker, and much more powerful. The Seo Crime Organization, one of the 3 founding families of organized power in Seoul, built over 2 generations of careful, ruthless accumulation. Jihan had inherited his father's empire at 26, following a car accident that was not an accident. He had spent 8 years since then consolidating, expanding, and quietly eliminating anyone who mistook his youth for weakness. He was, by any measure, dangerous. He was also, on that particular Tuesday morning, bored. He had come to inspect the property progress personally, because his site managers had been slow, and he found that his presence tended to accelerate things. He did not notice Amara at first. She noticed him, the way you notice weather. What happened next was small and large simultaneously. One of Jihan's men, a junior associate trying to demonstrate efficiency, walked past the raised garden beds, glanced at the cluster of plants Amara had been trying to protect, and said, loudly enough for the group to hear, "What is this? Some kind of weed situation? Get it cleared." Amara stepped forward. "Don't touch those." The associate turned, looked at her with genuine surprise, not because she'd spoken, but because she'd spoken as if she had standing to speak. "Excuse me? Those plants are mine. They've been established here for 15 years. Some of them cannot be replaced. You're not clearing them." A silence opened up in the group. The kind of silence that happens when something unexpected has occurred and everyone is waiting to see how the person at the top of the hierarchy will respond. Jihan turned, looked at her. She looked back. Later, she would not be able to explain what she felt in that moment.
It wasn't fear exactly.
It was something more like recognition, the sensation of looking at something powerful and knowing it, the way you know a thunderstorm before it breaks. He walked over, looked at the plants she was protecting, looked at her.
"This," he said.
His Korean was crisp, formal, slightly cold. "This is what you're making noise about." "It's not noise," she said. In Korean, her mother's Korean, clean and careful. "It's a property rights dispute, and I have documentation." Something moved across his face. Not quite amusement. Not quite respect. Something in between, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. Then one of his other men, older, with the comfortable cruelty of someone who has spent decades interpreting his boss's silences, leaned in and said, in a low voice that was nonetheless loud enough, "She's the gardener. The one from the building next door. Half African, half Korean. Sells weeds out of her apartment." And Jihan did something she would not forget. He laughed. Not a loud laugh. A quiet one, a small, dismissive exhale of sound that somehow carried more weight than shouting would have. He turned back to his men as if the matter was settled, as if she had been assessed and found to be beneath further consideration. "Clear it," he said. "All of it." He walked away. Amara stood very still. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, she told herself. With fury. With the very specific fury of a person who has been made invisible by someone who has never once in his life been made invisible himself. She watched them begin to pull up her plants. She documented everything on her phone. She took photographs of every bed, every plant, every marker being removed. She filed a complaint with the district office that afternoon. She spoke to a community legal aid organization. She did everything that a person with no money and no connections can do, which is to say, she did everything correctly, and it made absolutely no difference. The garden was gone by Friday. She grieved it quietly. She repotted what she could save. She moved the most critical specimens, including the Adwaran cran, onto her mother's rooftop, into pots, where they continued to grow in stubborn defiance. She told herself the story was over. She was wrong. 11 days later, Jihan was shot. She didn't know this at the time, of course. She was on her rooftop at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, sitting with her plants in the dark the way she sometimes did when she needed to think. The night was warm and the city hummed below her, and she was thinking about nothing in particular when she heard it. Not the shots themselves, those were too far and too quiet, but the sound of a vehicle moving fast through the alley behind the building, and then stopping. And then a sound she recognized from years of working alongside her father in clinics in Accra, the sound of a person trying not to show how much pain they were in. She went to the rooftop edge and looked down. In the alley below, partially hidden by the shadow of the building, was a black car with one door hanging open. 2 men stood beside it in obvious agitation, speaking in urgent, hushed tones. And on the ground between them, sitting with his back against the car's rear wheel, was Seo Jihan. He was holding his left side. The suit jacket that had cost more than her monthly rent was dark with blood. She watched for exactly 3 seconds. Then she went downstairs. Later, she would examine that decision. 3 seconds to watch. Then immediate action. No deliberation, no calculation. Her body had simply moved in the direction of a person who was bleeding, the way her father had trained her from childhood to move. You don't choose who needs help, her father had said once. The need chooses you. She came out through the building's rear service door. The 2 men with Jihan, bodyguards, she would learn, named Woo Jin and Tae-chan, turned immediately with the focused alarm of people trained to perceive threats. One of them had a hand inside his jacket. "I'm not a threat," she said in Korean, holding up both hands. Her canvas bag was over her shoulder. She had grabbed it automatically. "I'm a herbalist. I live here. I heard." She looked past them at Jihan. "He's losing too much blood. Whatever you're planning to do, you need to do it faster than you're currently doing it." "We have people coming," Woo Jin said.
Tightly.
"How long?" A pause that told her everything. "Too long." She moved toward Jihan. Tae-chan shifted to block her. "Move," she said. Not loudly. With the specific calm authority of someone who has held a person's life in their hands before and knows what it requires. "I'm not going to hurt him. I'm going to look at the wound." "Move." Something in her voice, or perhaps something in the way Jihan himself was deteriorating in real time, his face going gray in a way that scared even his own men, made Tae-chan step aside. She crouched beside Jihan. He looked at her. His eyes were pain-glazed but present, still focused, still carrying that controlled coldness even now. And then recognition crossed his face, slow, effortful, like surfacing from water. "You," he said. "Me," she confirmed, and pressed her hand firmly over his to hold the makeshift compression his bodyguard had applied.
"Don't talk.
Breathe slowly." She assessed. The wound was a through and through in the lateral abdomen, bad, but not immediately fatal if blood loss was controlled. But something else worried her. His skin coloration was wrong. The gray was wrong. His breathing pattern was wrong for simple blood loss. She looked at his eyes. His pupils were slightly uneven. "What did they use?" she said to Woo Jin. "The weapon." "Do you know?" Woo Jin stared at her. "A gun." "I know that." Was there anything else? Any dart, any injection, any secondary contact? A hesitation. There was, one of them had something. Before we got him out. A secondary device.
We don't know what.
Her blood went cold. She knew. She had seen it once before, in Accra, in a clinic her father ran near the port, a weapon favored by certain criminal organizations in West Africa and, apparently, adopted since by their counterparts elsewhere. A poison delivered alongside or just after a bullet wound, designed to complicate treatment, to make the wound untreatable by conventional medicine by triggering a specific cascade reaction in the blood's clotting system. A poison with only one reliable antidote. A plant-based compound, derived from, and she almost laughed, she almost cried. The universe's timing was simply extraordinary. Cryptostegia grandiflora. The plant he had laughed at. The plant he had ordered torn from the ground. The plant that was, right now, in a pot on the rooftop above their heads. She did not tell him yet. There was no time for the poetry of irony. I need to get him upstairs, she said.
Now.
Getting a 6-foot-something mafia boss who was both bleeding and beginning to show signs of systemic poisoning up 4 flights of stairs with the help of 2 enormous bodyguards who didn't entirely trust her was, Amara would later reflect, the single most physically demanding thing she had ever done. They made it. She cleared her kitchen table. She laid him on it. He protested, briefly, until his body simply stopped cooperating with his preferences. His men stood on either side, tense and helpless in the way that powerful men become helpless in the face of biology. She worked. She had a system, her father's system, refined over 30 years of working in spaces where the pharmacy was not an option. She cleaned the wound. She controlled the bleeding with direct pressure and a compression technique her father had learned from a Malian field medic. She started assessing the poison's progression through markers she could observe: skin color, breathing, microtremors in the extremities. What are you giving him? Wu Jin demanded, as she began preparing the first compound. Something that will slow the poison's progression until I can prepare the full treatment, she said. She didn't look up. I need you to stop talking to me for approximately 20 minutes. Silence. She worked. Jihan, to his credit, was a remarkably controlled patient. He was conscious for most of it. He watched her with those cold, careful eyes that she was beginning to realize saw considerably more than they revealed. He didn't make noise about the pain. When she needed him to hold still, he held still. When she needed him to breathe a certain way, he breathed that way. Once, when she was working close to his face, checking his pupils again, he said, very quietly, so only she could hear, "You know what's in me." It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said. "Can you fix it?" She looked at him directly. "I can, but I need something from your rooftop first." A pause. Then, "My rooftop?" "My rooftop," she corrected. "The building next door. The one you had cleared." The silence that followed had a different texture than the others. "I'll explain later," she said. "Right now I need you to not die, and I need your men to not shoot me while I go upstairs." She got the Adwaran crayon. She brought it back to the kitchen. She processed it, carefully, precisely, the way her grandmother had shown her mother and her mother had shown her, the way the knowledge moved through women across generations like water through stone. She prepared the compound. She administered it. And then she sat down in the chair beside the table where Seo Jihan was lying, and she watched and she waited, and she kept her face very calm while inside she was calculating, recalculating, praying to the quiet God her father had always prayed to, not the God of churches but the God of growing things, of patience, of roots that go deeper than anyone thinks. Around 4 in the morning, his color began to change. By 5, his breathing had normalized. By 6, when pale gray soul dawn was coming through her kitchen window, she allowed herself to exhale. He was going to live. Jihan woke fully around 8. He was in her bed. They had moved him from the kitchen table around 3. When it became clear, he was stabilizing. Her bedroom was small and plain. There was a wooden carving on the wall that her father had sent. There were plants on every windowsill. He lay still for a moment, looking at the ceiling, taking inventory of himself in the methodical way of a man accustomed to assessing situations upon waking. Then he turned his head and found Amara sitting in the chair in the corner, asleep. Her head was tilted against the wall. She was still in the clothes she'd been wearing the night before, which were ruined. Her hands were folded in her lap. He looked at her for a long time. Wu Jin appeared in the doorway. Jihan looked at him. Wu Jin answered the unasked question with a small nod. She had not left. She had not called anyone. She had not taken photographs or sent messages. She had simply worked through the night and then fallen asleep in the chair. Jihan looked at the ceiling again. Something was happening in his chest that he did not have immediate language for. It was unfamiliar, which made it, to him, automatically suspicious. He filed it away. He was good at filing things. When Amara woke, he was sitting up. She blinked. Assessed him in 3 seconds, the practiced clinical assessment she'd been doing her whole life. Color, improved. Eyes, present and sharp. Posture, contained but not pained. You should still be lying down, she said. I've been lying down for 8 hours. You were poisoned 8 hours ago. And now I'm not. He said it the way he probably said most things, as a statement of existing fact, not a point of debate. She stood, went to check his wound. He submitted to this, with the same controlled patience he'd shown the night before. She changed the dressing. She checked the secondary signs of the poison's recession. Everything looked as it should.
What was it? He said.
The poison. She told him. Explained the compound, the delivery mechanism, the blood cascade it triggered, the reason conventional treatment would have failed. He listened with his full attention, genuinely, she realized. Not performing interest. Actually listening. And the cure, he said. When she didn't immediately answer, he added, You said you needed something from your rooftop. What was it? A pause. Cryptostegia grandiflora, she said. Commonly known in Ghana as Adwara Nkran. She watched his face. She saw the moment he connected it. The stillness that came over him. Not guilt exactly, because she suspected guilt was not an emotion he regularly trafficked in, but something adjacent. Recognition. The weight of a specific irony landing. The plant from your garden, he said. The plant from the garden you had demolished, she confirmed. Yes. A long silence. If I hadn't had it on the rooftop, she said, you would have died. His men. She nodded toward the door where Wu Jin stood, pretending not to listen. Were at least 2 hours away from anyone who would have understood what was in you. By then it would have been too late. She said it factually. Not as accusation. Not as leverage. Simply as truth. He looked at her. Why did you help me? She considered the question genuinely. Because you were bleeding, she said, and I knew what to do. After what I did to your garden. After what you did to my garden, she confirmed. Something moved through his expression again. That same barely visible something she had caught on the first day. She was beginning to think it was the closest his face came to softness. I owe you, he said. Yes, she agreed. You do. He should have left that morning. His world did not accommodate extended absences well. There were calls that needed answering, matters that needed managing, people who needed to see him present and functioning to maintain the equilibrium his continued existence held together. Power, he had learned, was like a human body. The moment it showed real vulnerability, every other system began reacting. He stayed for 3 days at it was, Amara would admit much later to her mother, the strangest 3 days of her life. Jihan's men set up a perimeter. The apartment building was gently, efficiently secured in ways the other residents didn't notice. Food appeared. Medical supplies appeared. A doctor arrived, a quiet, professional man who examined Jihan, reviewed Amara's treatment notes with visible surprise, and then told Jihan, with the careful neutrality of a physician who had learned not to editorialize, that whoever had treated him had almost certainly saved his life. Jihan said nothing. He looked at the window. Amara spent those 3 days doing what she did, tending her plants, preparing compounds for her regular clients, cooking for her mother, who occupied the bedroom and who had. Amara thanked every ancestor, slept soundly through the entire first night, and asked no difficult questions about the large men now standing outside the apartment door. Her mother was 63, and she had grown up knowing that the world contained things that required discretion. She accepted the situation with a serenity that Amara found simultaneously reassuring and suspicious. Jihan, confined to the apartment and forbidden by his own body from returning to his usual operations, did something Amara hadn't expected. He became, cautiously, curious. He asked her about the plants. Not with the dismissive assessment of the first day. Something had shifted in him. Some armor had thinned, the way armor does when a person has been made vulnerable against their will and survived it. He asked with genuine questions, the kind of questions that showed he was listening to her answers. She told him about her father, about the clinic in Accra, about the way her grandmother had kept a garden through decades of political instability, through times when food was scarce, treating the neighbors who couldn't afford hospitals with a knowledge that was older than the hospitals themselves. He listened. He didn't offer much in return, he was not. She was learning, a man who offered things easily. But he listened in a way that felt, to someone accustomed to being talked over, remarkable. On the second evening, he said, Your Korean is formal. My mother taught me, she said. She grew up in a house where language was taken seriously. Your mother speaks differently. Amara looked at him. You've been talking to my mother? She came to bring me tea this afternoon, he said. She told me about the garden. The original one. In Ghana. Amara was quiet for a moment. She told you about my grandmother's garden? She told me that the seeds in your garden were 40 years old, that they came from her mother, who had kept them through a famine, I think. She was telling me something about the worth of things that don't look valuable. Silence.
She's subtle, he said.
Your mother. She's not subtle at all, Amara said. She just trusts that people are smart enough to understand what she's really saying. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile but was, she suspected, the closest he usually got. On the third day, he told her what had happened. Not everything. She understood that there were layers to his life that she would not be given access to, not yet, perhaps not ever, and she had made her peace with that. But he told her enough. He told her that the shooting had been an escalation from a faction within a rival organization that had been building conflict for 18 months. He told her the weapon, the secondary poison, had been sourced specifically, carefully, to be untreatable. He told her they had believed they were eliminating him. But they didn't know about the plant, she said. They didn't know about the plant, he agreed. They didn't know about me. A pause. Nobody knew about you, he said. And something in his voice, a very small shift, almost imperceptible, made the words feel like more than they said on the surface. She didn't examine it. She stored it. The way she stored seeds. Carefully for later. He left on the third day. Quietly, efficiently. The way he'd arrived. His men materialized the cars. The perimeter dissolved. The apartment building became ordinary again. Before he left, he stood at her door.
The garden, he said.
I'll have it restored. You can't restore what was there, she said. Those beds took 15 years. No, he agreed. But I can give you space. More than you had. And time. She looked at him steadily. Why? He was quiet for a moment.
Because I owe you, he said.
And because, a pause. The longest she'd heard from him. Because things that save lives should not be destroyed. She held his gaze. Agreed.
He left.
She stood in the doorway of her apartment for a long time after the cars had gone, one hand on the door frame, feeling the particular quiet of a morning that has changed but hasn't yet explained how. 3 weeks passed. Not quietly, exactly. She heard things from the small network of her city life, from her mother's friends, from the community legal aid worker who had helped her file the property complaint. The construction on the Seo Holdings property had paused. The site was apparently under internal review. The property boundary survey was being contested. She didn't know if this was coincidence. She suspected it was not. On a Wednesday morning, a property manager she had never met called her to inform her that the communal garden space had been formally returned to the Residents Association with an additional strip of ground, twice the size of what had been taken, attached as a lease agreement in perpetuity, with no rent. She stood in her kitchen for a full minute after the call ended. Then she went upstairs and sat with her plants. She allowed herself, privately, to feel the complicated texture of this.
He had done what he said.
He had given back more than he'd taken. But the question of what it meant, what any of this meant, what she wanted it to mean was not a question she was ready to answer. She was a practical woman. She believed in roots and evidence and time. She believed that most things, if you gave them the right conditions, would reveal their true nature eventually. She went back downstairs and started planning the new garden. He came back 6 weeks after the shooting. Not with cars and men and drama. He came alone, which she suspected took considerable personal negotiation, on a Sunday evening when the light was going gold over the city and the new garden beds she had been building were half finished, the earth turned and ready. She was on her knees in the soil when she heard the gate. She looked up. He stood at the entrance to the garden space. He was in dark clothes, not a suit this time, or at least a less formal version of one. He looked, she thought, very slightly like a man who was uncertain about something, which she imagined was not a state he occupied frequently.
You could have called, she said.
I didn't have your number. She sat back on her heels, looked at him. Woo Jin has my number. He documented everything that happened in my apartment. He definitely has my number. A pause. I wanted to come in person. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, there's a spare trowel by the gate. If you're going to stand there, you might as well be useful. He looked at the trowel, looked at the garden beds, looked at his clothes. Then he walked over, picked up the trowel, crouched beside her in the soil, and said, what are we planting? And something inside her chest quietly, irreversibly shifted. He came back. Not every Sunday, his life did not permit that kind of regularity. But he came. Sometimes with advance notice, sometimes without. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes longer. He learned, slowly and without any particular grace, the basic requirements of the garden. When to water, what not to touch, which plants had the kind of dignity that demanded you ask before you interfered. She watched him learn. She watched the way he held knowledge, carefully, precisely, like a man who had survived by never being caught not knowing something, adapting now to a different kind of not knowing, one that she was patient with in the way she was patient with her seedlings. She did not ask questions about his other life. She was not naive about what he was. She had grown up with her mother's stories about her father's city, about the organizations that ran beneath official Seoul like root systems. Old, entrenched, powerful. She understood the world Jihan moved in the way you understand weather, not with approval or disapproval, but with clear-eyed knowledge of what it was and what it could do. What she watched for, what she was always watching for in people and plants alike was character. The thing underneath the surface. The root system. What she found in him, slowly, was this. He was precise. He was honest in the specific way of people who consider lying beneath them, not because they have high principles about truth, but because they're too proud to think they need to deceive anyone. He had a mind that moved fast and held things well. He was, in ways he clearly hadn't been taught, and had somehow arrived at himself, capable of actual attention, the rare kind, the kind that makes the person being attended to feel like the only thing in the room. And he was careful with her. Not in the way powerful men are sometimes careful with women they want things from, the careful of calculation. In the way of a man who understands, for perhaps the first time, that something is valuable and fragile in the way that strong things can be fragile, and that carelessness has a cost he doesn't want to pay. She noticed this. She filed it. She waited. The attack on her, when it came, was not surprising in retrospect. What was surprising was her own response to it. It came in October, 6 months after the garden incident, on a night when she was walking home from visiting a client on the other side of the neighborhood. She was 2 blocks from her building when a car pulled alongside her, and a man got out, not threatening her physically, not yet, but standing in her path in the particular way that is its own kind of threat, with the cold performance of someone delivering a message. Seo Jihan, the man said. You should be more careful about who you associate with. She looked at him steadily. Her hands were in her pockets. Her heart rate was elevated but controlled. I'm not sure who you think I am, she said. I know exactly who you are, he said. The herbalist. The one who saved him. A pause. The one he visits on Sundays. So they had been watching. She had wondered if they had been watching. I want you to understand, the man continued, that your continued health is something that can be discussed. If Seo Jihan finds certain pressure points, he becomes more cooperative. She was quiet for a moment. You're making a significant mistake, she said. He smiled. It was an unpleasant smile. I don't think I am. You're assuming, she said, that threatening me will make him cooperative. You don't know him as well as you think. She held the man's gaze. And you're assuming that I need him to respond to this threat. You don't know me at all. Then she stepped around him and walked home. She called Woo Jin. Not Jihan, Woo Jin. She had, over the months, developed a working relationship with Woo Jin that she privately valued for its practicality. Woo Jin was a man who processed information efficiently and without drama, which she appreciated. She described what had happened. Precisely, factually, including the car's partial plate number she had noted, the man's approximate height and the specific intonation of his speech that suggested he was from a particular region. Woo Jin was quiet on the other end. Then, I'll tell him. I know you will, she said. That's not why I called. I called because I want to know who they are and what they're actually planning. I need to understand the situation, not be protected from information about it. A pause. I'll relay that. I know you will, she said again, and ended the call. Jihan arrived within the hour. She had made tea. She offered him a cup. He stood in her kitchen with the focused intensity of a man whose control was being very slightly tested and who was managing it through effort. You should have called me first, he said. I called Wu Jin because I wanted information, not a reaction, she said. Sit down. He sat. Something about the directness of her, the complete absence of the deference he was accustomed to, the matter-of-fact authority with which she managed her own environment, she had observed, over time, both disarmed and grounded him, like standing on solid earth instead of performing the constant balance of his other world. Tell me who they are, she said. He told her. Not everything, but enough. The rival faction. Their objective. The way they had been escalating since the summer. The specific angle they were trying. Looking for leverage, for softness in him, for something they could use. She listened. Then she said, They think I'm a weakness. Yes. And you're trying to decide whether I am. He looked at her directly. No, he said. I'm not. The certainty in his voice was not performed. She had learned, by now, to read the difference. Good, she said. Because I'm not. And I don't intend to be managed out of my own life because of your enemies. She set her cup down. But I also understand that I'm now part of a situation. I want to understand it clearly. No filters. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Amara. It was the first time he had used her name. She registered it without showing it. Yes, she said. If you want out of the situation, he said carefully, I can make that happen. I can ensure your safety, your mother's safety, and that you're not touched by any of this. You would have to step away from a pause. From this. From this. She heard the weight in those two words. What they were actually saying. She looked at him. At the controlled face. At the something underneath the controlled face that she had been watching grow, slowly and stubbornly, like a plant in bad conditions, finding light anyway. I'm a gardener, she said. I don't step away from things I've planted. A long silence. That's not an answer, he said. Yes, it is, she said. You just need to understand the language. The resolution came in November. It came the way resolutions do in Jihan's world. Not through conversation or compromise, but through a decisive, carefully executed action that removed the threat with the kind of efficiency that does not invite sequels. Amara did not participate in this. She was not asked to and did not offer. She was a healer. She had clear lines about what she was and was not. But she understood what had happened, and she accepted it with the same clear-eyed practicality with which she accepted everything. The world had structures, and those structures had a logic, and the people who operated within them had their own code, not her code, but not, in its own way, without a kind of order. What mattered to her, in the immediate aftermath, was this. When it was over, Jihan came to the garden. It was a cold evening. The November garden had gone quiet, most things put to bed, only the hardiest specimens still green and visible. She was covering the beds for the coming cold when she heard the gate. He came and stood beside her. She handed him a length of frost cloth without looking up, and he held it in place while she secured the edges, and they worked in silence through the garden until it was done. Then they stood in the cold, looking at the covered beds. It's over, he said. I know, she said. A pause. Amara. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her with his full attention. That particular quality of attention that she had come to understand was not something he gave freely, and that landing on her always felt like standing in clear sunlight. I don't know how to do this correctly, he said. It was, she suspected, one of the most difficult sentences he had ever said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, Neither do I. I generally find that if you give things the right conditions, they figure out what to do themselves. That's a metaphor about plants. All my best insights are metaphors about plants, she confirmed. And then, very carefully, he reached over and took her hand. Not dramatically, simply. The way you reach for something you've been thinking about reaching for a long time and have finally stopped talking yourself out of. She looked down at their joined hands. His large and careful. Hers, still slightly soil-stained at the knuckles, as they always were. She turned her hand over and held his back. They stood there in the cold garden for a while. The city hummed around them. The covered plants settled into their winter quiet. Next spring, she said eventually, the Adwara and Cran will flower. It only does it every few years. The flowers are orange. Very small, very precise. I'll be here, he said. She believed him. Spring came. The garden came back, as gardens do, as they always do, with the stubborn, patient miracle of growth that does not require anyone's permission or belief. The beds filled again. The new space Jihan had given back was slowly, carefully brought into cultivation, each section planned with the methodical love that is the gardener's particular form of faith. Amara's mother recovered fully by March. She sat in the garden on warm afternoons with her tea and her books and occasionally with Jihan, who she had developed a relationship with that Amara chose, wisely, not to examine too closely. Her mother had the specific pleasure of a woman who has recognized something before everyone else and is waiting for the world to catch up. Wu Jin, who had initially regarded Amara with the professional wariness of a man responsible for keeping his principle alive, had arrived by April at a careful respect that expressed itself in small, practical ways. He now texted her directly when Jihan's schedule changed, before Jihan had to ask him to. She reciprocated by occasionally sending him home remedies for the chronic shoulder pain she had noticed him managing through sheer will. They never discussed this arrangement explicitly. It simply existed.
And Jihan
came to the garden on Sundays. He learned, slowly, which plants needed protection and which were tougher than they looked. He asked questions in the precise, absorbing way he asked questions about everything. He was learning, Amara thought, not just about plants, but about what it felt like to be in a space where power was held lightly, where the measure of things was not force but patience, where the most important work happened quietly, underground, invisible, over long time. She watched him learn this with a feeling she didn't have simple language for. Something like watching a seed decide to grow. Something like hope, but older than hope. Something rooted. In April, the Adwara and Cran flowered. Small flowers, as she had said. Orange, precise, almost architectural in their neatness. They appeared on a Tuesday morning, and she stood with her coffee and looked at them for a long time. She texted Jihan. It's flowering. He replied, within 2 minutes, with, I'm coming. He arrived that afternoon. Stood with her in front of the plant. Looked at the flowers for a while.
They're small, he said.
Yes. But they saved my life. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I laughed at this plant. You did, she confirmed. I was wrong. She looked at him. At the face that had, over these months, become in some small increments more readable to her. Not open, not soft in any conventional sense, but legible to her in the particular way that long attention creates fluency. You are wrong about a lot of things, she said. So was I. That's not the part that matters. What's the part that matters? She looked back at the flowers. The part that matters is what grows after. He stood beside her and looked at the small orange flowers that had saved his life. Beside them, the garden was alive with April, with a specific abundance of things that had survived winter and were now, in the manner of survivors everywhere, living as loudly as they could. She felt his hand find hers. She laced her fingers through his. I didn't ask, he said, properly, before. No, she agreed. I'm asking now. She turned to look at him. The sunlight was warm. The garden smelled of soil and green, and the particular sweetness of the Adwara and Cran in bloom. Amara, he said. Simple. No performance. No calculation. Just her name in his mouth, which she had come to understand meant more from him than declarations from anyone else. Yes, she said. Not because she had been waiting to be asked. Not because she needed his protection or his power or the particular gravity of being wanted by a man like this. But because she had watched him, really watched him, with the patience of someone who knows that character reveals itself slowly and truly, like roots, and she had seen what was there. And what was there was worth saying yes to. He exhaled. Not dramatically. Just the specific exhale of a person who has been holding something carefully for a long time and has finally been told it's safe to put it down. She squeezed his hand. The garden was bright around them. The adwara and cran flowered, small and orange and precise, as it had flowered for 40 years, across oceans, through the hands of women who kept things alive when everything said not to bother. Some things are worth saving, Amara had always known. She had been right.